Listen now as Elizabeth Clare Prophet and her guest discuss critical issues of the day. This week, Mrs. Prophet talks with Zecharia Sitchin, author of The 12th Planet, The Stairway to Heaven, and The Wars of Gods and Men, who presents his case for a planet in our solar system beyond Pluto, whose astronauts have been visiting Earth for 450,000 years, and whose wars led to a nuclear holocaust in the Middle East 4,000 years ago.
Welcome to Summit University Forum, where the flame of freedom speaks. Today our guest is Zecharia Sitchin. He was born in Russia and raised in Palestine, where he acquired a profound knowledge of modern and ancient Hebrew and other Semitic and European languages, the Old Testament, the history of archaeology of the Near East. Mr. Sitchin attended the London School of Economics, was graduated from the University of London, majoring in economic history. A leading journalist and editor in Israel for many years, he now lives and writes in New York. He is a member of the Israel Exploration Society, the American Oriental Society, and the Middle East Studies Association of North America. In 1976, Mr. Sitchin published the first of his Earth Chronicles series, The 12th Planet, a revolutionary work which made a case for the existence of another planet in our solar system, whose astronauts have been visiting the Earth for 450,000 years. It was followed in 1980 by The Stairway to Heaven, and in June of this year he published The Wars of Gods and Men, a startling work that provides evidence that the wars of men began with the wars of the gods, wars for the control of this Earth, which began on their own planet and led to a nuclear holocaust in the Middle East 4,000 years ago. Zecharia Sitchin, welcome to Summit University Forum. Thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for having me. I've been waiting a long time to be invited.
Well, this is the long-awaited moment for us. We're very happy to have you with us.
Thank you.
We have tried to deliver your message. We have studied your books. Now we want to hear it from the expert. So won't you tell us how you got started in this discovery?
Well, Elizabeth, the discovery, as you call it, has really been a journey perhaps in something that could be best described as a time machine, because this is a journey or a vehicle by which we could go back in time. But by going back, we also can take a glimpse, I believe, of the future. And my own journey, on which I hope those who read my books and those who will listen and see us, my own journey began when I was a schoolboy. And don't ask me how long ago it was. I was studying in what was then Palestine, the Old Testament in its original Hebrew language. And that, I must stress, made a lot of difference, because most people who learn or read the Bible, the Old Testament, part of it, in English or in French or whatever other language, or even in the Greek, which was the first European language into which it was translated, are really reading interpretations. I was fortunate enough to learn it in its original Hebrew, and we were reading the wondrous tales about how heaven and earth were created, how the Adam was created, and we reached the very exciting tale of Noah and the ark. And in this chapter, the 6th chapter of the book of Genesis, before the story of Noah, before the story of the deluge begins, there are 8 very enigmatic verses, which evidently are the remnant of some longer story that was edited out or cut short or abbreviated. And of those 8 verses, what is mostly known or common, because it's used by preachers, Sunday preachers, is that one verse included in them that says, those were the days just before the deluge, when there were giants upon the earth, and they married the daughters of men, had children by them, and so on. And when we reached those verses, the teacher said, those were the days when there were giants upon the earth. I raised my hand, and I remember that vividly because that is the origin of, of this. And I said, excuse me, teacher, but why do you say giants when the Hebrew word in the Bible is Nephilim, which comes from the Hebrew verb nafol, which can be translated as to fall down, to come down, to descend. And I said, doesn't it mean that they were those who had descended, who had come down to earth from the heavens? And he said, Sitchin, sit down. You don't question the Bible. And of course I did not, as I understood it then until now, I did not question the Bible. I questioned an interpretation. And that was really the seed implanted in my mind. Who were the Nephilim? Why did the Bible, which is very precise in its selection of words and terminology, why did the Bible call them, describe them as those who had descended, who had come down? This was the beginning of my journey in time.
How did you conclude then that these were astronauts from other planets?
Well, at that time I didn't conclude it at all, because it was quite a long time ago where the only notion of traveling from Earth to another celestial body were the tales of Jules Verne, you know, the trip to the moon and so on. Nobody seriously believed in the possibility of leaving Earth and going somewhere else. And certainly the word astronaut, or what it stood for, wasn't even coined, was not known. What I did was, as I grew up and became interested in archaeology and the ancient languages of the Near East and the other studies that were necessary to put these writings together, what I did is what I started to read up on biblical commentators, to see what the commentators in the 20th century, in the 19th century, and even in much earlier times, what have they had to say about those 6 or 8 verses, and how did they interpret the word Nephilim? Now, to my great surprise, I discovered that many commentators, even some who are interpreting or commenting on the Bible verse by verse, including one, for example, Dr. Sarna, whose commentary on the Bible is the textbook in the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. And he comments on the Bible, on the, say, book of Genesis, verse by verse. When he comes to chapter 6, he just skips the 8 verses. He begins from verse 9. They don't exist. But a Jewish commentator in the 19th century, over 100 years ago, I must point it out, by name of Malbim in Russia, wrote and said that Nephilim means, what the Bible means is that there were superior beings who had come to earth from another place in the heavens, and they married the daughters of men, and they had children by them. He hurries to say then, those are the beliefs of the hidden peoples, and of course not of Orthodox Jews. But that was the opening to me, that the answer to the question, who were the Nephilim, and eventually, as you said, that they were astronauts or visitors to Earth from another planet, the clue to me was in that interpretation, that commentary, 19th century commentary by the Malbim. Now this led me to, therefore, to study what those people believed in. And we all know the so-called Greek mythologies about Zeus and Aphrodite and the other gods, or they call them the immortals, who were so unhuman, so superior because they could fly in the skies. They had weapons that could shoot lightnings. They were so much superior. They could read humans' minds. And at the same time, they were so human. They loved and they were jealous, and they had all the failings of us mortals. They were very interesting, but who really were they?
I really have to say that it was not until reading your latest book, The Wars of Gods and Men, that it finally occurs to one that these are no longer myths. These have some very concrete realities. Why don't you tell us about these?
Yes, to reach the answer to your question in this time machine, taking people back, what I found out was that the Greek, so-called Greek mythologies, and the Greeks were firm believers that the origin of their beliefs of their gods was in Egypt. They attributed it to the ancient Egyptians. As you know, Alexander the Great went in search of immortality. He started in Egypt searching for it. And as soon as he reached Egypt, he went to a very remote oasis in the western desert, because he was told that there he could hear an oracle confirming what he needed confirming. The reason he went to Egypt was that there was a rumor in the court of Macedonia that Philip was not his real father, that his real father was an Egyptian god by name of Ammon, which meant the hidden one, not hidden, but hidden, the hidden one. And he wanted confirmation of that, because if he were really the son of a god born by a human mother, he was entitled to become immortal, and he was seeking immortality. He went to that oasis, he heard some oracle, he entered the place alone. He came out and said, well, my semi-divine birth was confirmed to me, but about immortality I was told something that I don't understand, and I have to go on looking. He went to the south of Egypt, seeking an answer there. There he was told to go to the Sinai Peninsula, because he'll find the answer there. He didn't find it there, because there 2 angels in a tunnel guarding the waters of life told him to go to Mesopotamia, that he'll find the answer in Babylon. In Babylon he sought the word of the Babylonian god Marduk, but he didn't get it. And what he did hear in Babylon, finally explained to him what his destiny was. His destiny was to become immortal, but only by being remembered as a great conqueror, not physically. So therefore he went and built everywhere cities called Alexandria to make sure that he'll be remembered. So that was his immortality. So in a way, Elizabeth, what happened to Alexander the Great happened to me. I didn't go to ask or seek omens in all those places, but I found them in the ancient texts, which are the basis for my writings. Wherever you start your journey, in Greece, in Egypt, among the Hittites, you end up in Mesopotamia. The end of his journey, and he died there in Babylon, the end of his journey is the beginning, or should be the beginning, of our journey.
So we come to Sumer.
We come to Sumer. The right word should really be Shumer, That is the Hebrew word for it. We say in English Sumer. And the word means the place of the guardians. The Egyptians, by the way, called their term for what we translate gods, with a small g, they called them Neteru, and that meant guardians. So Sumer, in Sumerian, was the land of the guardians. The Egyptians called their gods guardians. And
we also speak of guardian angels.
Guardian angels. There are many people who believe that there's still guardians among us, or that they have trained or educated or implanted their genes in some of us.
The question is, did these guardians teach the people of Sumer what they knew about astronomy, what we're just finding out about today, and what did they really know?
There's no doubt that they did, and I say no doubt not only because that is what the Sumerians said in the writings, in the text that they've left us, but among the achievements of the Sumerian civilization, which were really incredible, anything we can think of, the first of it was in Sumer, not just the use of the wheel and other technological innovations of irrigation in agriculture, in high-rise buildings. Some of their buildings were 7 stories high, as you know the biblical tale of the Tower of Babel that was a skyscraper. So it was a very high civilization 6,000 years ago. But most amazing, as you wanted me to point out, was their knowledge of astronomy, which was really astronomical. They knew of the complete solar system. As people know or should know, we have found out about the planets beyond Saturn only in the recent, I think, Uranus was discovered around 1750, something like that. Neptune about 100 or more years later. Pluto only about 50 years ago, when many of the Sumerian texts were found and first translated, including the astronomical ones. Those astronomers who tried to make sense of them didn't even know about Pluto yet. So the Sumerians have known of all the planets we know of, have described them, and have even depicted them pictorially. This is an enlargement of a depiction on a cylinder seal, and you can see here a depiction of the complete solar system, which sketch-like is this. This is the sketch of what you see there, up there. You can see that they knew that the sun, and not the earth as the Greeks 3,000 years after them believed, the sun is in the center. They knew of all the planets, and I compare it with our knowledge of the solar system, in their right positions, in their relatively right sizes. And they said, not only knew all that, they said there is one more planet, which you can see here, which is missing from our knowledge. And they had a tale which was read on a certain night after nightfall as part of the New Year celebrations. Their New Year celebrations lasted like the Jewish ones today, 10 days. And on the last night, a text, a poem, which scholars today call the Epic of Creation, was read and told the people what was known at the time of how the solar system was created, something that we ourselves are just trying to find out with all the sophisticated equipment we have today. And the tale is that at the beginning, there were 3 celestial bodies: the sun, its messenger, for which they had a name, but we call it Mercury, and an ancient female planet, male-female, they call Tiamat, meaning mother of life. Then the other planets were created in pairs, 2 more here and 2 and 2, and so on and so forth, until the whole solar system was completed. But then an invader from outer space, a planet from some other solar system, how it escaped that solar system, what catastrophe had thrust it towards our solar system, those texts don't say. I don't know. But it came, it entered our own solar system, and as it was drawn into our solar system, ended up colliding with Tiamat, with that other olden planet, breaking it in 2. One half was smashed to bits and pieces and became the comets and the asteroid belt. One of the puzzles that our astronomers have no answer for is why the comets orbit in an orbit counter to the one of all the other planets. And the answer is that the invader, whom the Sumerians called Nibiru, the Babylonians named it Marduk, that invader has this clockwise orbit, whereas all the other planets have a counterclockwise. So when it smashed Tiamat to bits and pieces, half of it, it pulled all those bits and pieces, the asteroids, the comets, into the kind of orbit that it had. On the next orbit, returning to the what they called the place of the celestial battle, it thrust Earth to a new orbit, and Earth is really, according to the Sumerian tales, the unbroken half of Tiamat. This answers again many puzzles. For example, why on our planet all the continents began on one side? You know, the Platonic theory that the plates are spreading, but originally they were all on one side. On the other side, as we know, still to this day, there was this huge cavity, which is to this day still the Pacific Basin covered with water. In the process, Earth, this half, pulled with it the chief satellite of Tiamat, which they called Kingu, which we call the moon. So the moon is a remainder, unbroken remainder of Tiamat, pulled to a new orbit with the unbroken half, which became the Earth. This was their cosmogony, which they read and repeated, and was like their declaration of faith once a year as part of the New Year celebrations. They said, what happened to the invader, to Marduk itself? They said it got caught in a vast elliptical, almost comet-like orbit, returning to our vicinity once every 3,600 years. Now the question is, how did they know all that? This was the puzzle that I faced when I found out that this was their extraordinary, amazing knowledge. How did they know about all the planets that could not be seen with the naked eye? How did they know about this planet Marduk that orbits so far out that certainly cannot be seen? How did they know, for example, that Earth is the 7th planet? That's what Earth was called, the 7th planet. Now we all know that Earth is the 3rd planet, because from the Sun we say there's Mercury, Venus, and Earth. Now, if, however, you count from the outside in, if somebody who devised the system of numbering began with Pluto and said Pluto is number 1, and Neptune is 2, Uranus is 3, Saturn is 4, Jupiter is 5, Mars is 6, Earth is the 7th planet. So all this evidence coming together led to the question which the Sumerians themselves have answered. And they said, those who had come from that planet, they told us all that. So if you say there's no such planet, and the question is there or isn't, and we can go into that too. If you say there's no such planet, so how come the Sumerians knew all that about all the other planets of which we do know? If there is such a planet, they say we know about it because those who came from it told us. So it's like a hermetically sealed circle. If you accept the circle here, you must complete it. About 2 years after my first book, The 12th Planet, was published, that astronomers at the US Naval Observatory in Washington have concluded that Pluto has a satellite, a small moon. Now that sounds like an insignificant discovery, so what? But that meant to them that Pluto alone could not account for disturbances, for perturbations, as they call it, in the orbits of the two planets neighboring it, Neptune and Uranus. And then they postulated that the only way this could be explained is that there must be one more celestial body beyond Pluto. They called it Planet X. Planet X meaning two things: the mystery planet, the one we don't know about, and also the Roman X10, the 10th planet. Because if you don't count the sun and the moon in the number of celestial bodies, then there are only 9 planets of which we know, plus Planet X, plus the 10th one. The Sumerians, for reasons which they explained, the sun, as they showed in their Epic of Creation, was the first member of the solar system, the central one. The moon, they said, is a celestial body in its own right because just before that celestial collision, it was in the process of separating and becoming a planet. But the celestial collision prevented it, and it was thrust to a new orbit together with the Earth, our Earth, and became our satellite. To show how much they knew, Elizabeth, is that they depict, and I don't want to go back to the previous depiction, they show Pluto not where it is today, because they say that Pluto started as a satellite of Saturn, but was pulled, thrust to its new present orbit by the invader on its continuing orbits. Our astronomers today surmise that Pluto began as a satellite of another planet. So even what we are finding out in that respect today, the Sumerians or their teachers had known already thousands and thousands of years ago.
So what is the next step for our astronomers to find out today? They're on the brink of the awareness of...
Well, the next step has been taken because NASA had agreed with the astronomers at the US Naval Observatory that there is one more celestial body beyond Pluto. NASA has been searching for it. NASA, about 4 years ago, directed the 2 Pioneer spacecraft that have gone beyond Jupiter and Saturn and into outer space, has directed them to separate so that they would measure in about a year or 2 at the most, they would measure the gravitational pull on them. And if both of them detect the same gravitational pull, it means that the pull comes from a very far out celestial object, which could be another sun or whatever in another solar system. But if one of them is subjected to a greater pull than the other, that means that it is nearing a celestial body, which then must be a planet, because the only way it could be there is if it orbits our sun. So NASA has done that about 3.5 years ago. Last year, NASA launched IRAS, which stands for Infrared Astronomical Station. It's a satellite that could detect celestial bodies which are very dim, could not be seen with normal telescopes, but could be seen through infrared light if they reflect some of it. And that IRAS has seen a celestial body about 4 times the size of Earth moving towards Earth, because on the 2 sweeps in that 1 year, 6 months and 6 months, in 6 months time difference between the 2 photographs, it was seen to be moving. It shifted position and moved towards Earth. Now, after the initial leak about it, suddenly there was a total denial of the whole thing. And when you contacted NASA or the people who have analyzed it, they said, we don't know what you're talking about, because but it was reported in the Washington Post and in other, there was a leak which they tried to plug. Now, this is another aspect altogether of why there seems to be a fear of acknowledging the possibility that we are not alone in our solar system. I don't have the answer for that, but it keeps puzzling me.
You don't have the fear. I don't have the fear.
No, I don't.
But do you believe that this is what they saw is the 12th planet?
What I call the 12th planet, what they call Planet X.
You're convinced they're one and the same?
Well, I would really be amazed if there are 2 unknown bodies. Amazed for 2 reasons. It would be a tremendous coincidence. And secondly, I believe so much in that the Sumerians knew what they were talking about. And if they said one more, I take their word for it.
So can you give us an estimate at the expected time of arrival of this 12th planet?
Well, it's not an easy question to answer, and one would have to get very technical in trying to answer it. I will try to answer it in my next book, because the 3 books are part of a 4-book concept under the overall umbrella title, The Earth Chronicles. It's not easy to answer because the planet, contrary to what many who may have even read my books, or many believe, does not just appear here like a comet, you know, that we can see it for 1 night or for 1 month and that's it. When it was seen, and there are even pictorial depictions of it by the Sumerians, it is depicted as a radiating planet that radiates its own heat and its own halo. Its symbol, by the way, was the cross. So the cross is not a symbol that began at the time of Christ. It goes back at least 6,000 years. And they saw it. There are texts that describe its progress in the skies as from the point that it could be seen until it disappeared. And that, as far as I can guess at the moment, may have lasted hundreds of years. Now, that does not mean that the visits or the landings or the comings and goings by the Nephilim, if we are to call them by their biblical name, that they exactly coincided, because they could have landed. That again involves space mechanics and space travel and other considerations, on which I spent some time and got some help from people more expert on that than me. They could have landed on Earth before the planet could be observed if they chose one way of space travel. they could have landed after it was observed. Whichever way, they had to catch up with it once it was seen. So when is it coming back is really not a precise question. It's maybe a theological question, maybe a moral question, maybe a question that can affect our lives, our behavior, it should, but it's not one that's easy to answer. And hopefully when I write the fourth book, I'll be your guest again and we can go into that.
By all means. Now, it could then be observable for as much as 600 years before it would have any consequence.
Right, could well be, right.
Now, are we leading to the point that in those days, just before the flood of Noah, which you have said was triggered by the passage or the crossing of the 12th planet, in those days, the presence of Nephilim would indicate that they came in advance of the arrival of the planet?
Oh yes, according to the Sumerian sources, and that's part of the. You see, each of my books can be read independently because there's enough information or enough of a basis in each one of them to understand. Each one of them looks at the story of what happened on Earth from a different viewpoint. The first one dealt mostly with the need, which I felt, the need to produce the evidence of what the Sumerians knew and the conclusion that there is one more planet from which others had come to Earth. The second book, The Stairway to Heaven, dealt with the same story but closer and closer to our times, to what some would even call historical times, because it deals with the adventures of a Sumerian king called Gilgamesh, of whom we know exactly when he lived, when he reigned at about 2700 BC, where he reigned, and Egyptian pharaohs who also went in search of immortality like Gilgamesh in afterlife. And that book therefore continues the story, but from the viewpoint of why did men search then and still searches for immortality? Why did people believe in antiquity that if they could join the so-called gods, if they could be taken aloft like Enoch was, or like the prophet Elijah, why would they then escape mortals' fate to die? The third book, which still takes the story ever closer to our times, again takes another look at the same story, more closer to our times, but a different look, and that is, why are there wars on Earth? Was man born a warrior? Do we fight because that's how we were born, to fight with each other? Or were we taught warfare? Were we made to fight wars? So the story, though it's looked at from different angles, really takes in each book the story from one time period to another, and it begins almost 500,000 years ago. It begins almost precisely 450,000 years ago, because then it was that they landed on Earth for the first time. And the details of the landing are extraordinarily clear, because the leader of the landing party, who was a great scientist in all fields of science, was known. His name was Enki. He led a group of 50 astronauts. We know how they landed because they splashed down in the waters of the Persian Gulf. We know where they set up their first Earth station number 1. We know what they called it. They called it Eridu, which literally meant home away from home. And all the names for Earth, even in English, but certainly if you take the German word Erde and the Persian word and even the Hebrew Eretz, they all come from that name, Eridu. Eridu, Erde, Earth. And that's how we look.
The god Enki. Is this an original?
No, it's a replica from the Louvre.
Well, speaking of replicas, why don't you tell us the creation story of these Nephilim and how they went about creating Homo sapiens?
Okay. It has to do with what you see here. This is the only statue or statuette of one of them, there were many, that has gold on it. And the reason is that it indicates the purpose for which he had come to Earth. As far as I could make from those tales, their planet was losing its atmosphere. They were at risk of annihilation, of seeing all life end on their planet. Due to various tales and circumstances, a court upheaval, and there's a very interesting Hittite tale that gives the information. The ruler that was deposed escaped in a spaceship to Earth. And I say spaceship not only because that was the only way to go from one planet to another, but also because those spaceships were depicted. And if there's anyone who still doesn't believe anything I'm saying, here is a 5,500-year-old depiction of a spacecraft. And we know exactly where it was, because it was between Mars, a six-pointed planet, because Mars was the sixth planet, and between Earth, whose number was 7, and you can see the 7 dots, and the moon accompanying the Earth. And this is one astronaut on Mars speaking to or being welcomed by someone on Earth. You see the wings to indicate he was an eagle. Their nickname was the Eagles, those who manned the spacecraft. And this is a spacecraft with its solar panels, as if you're looking at the design by NASA engineers.
Where was this record found?
In Sumer. All these are Sumerian artifacts.
How long have we had those tablets, that particular one?
Well, this tablet, which is found in the Hermitage Museum in Leningrad, was found almost 100 years ago, is known, has been published, was not found by me, but when you ask the scholar what does it depict, they say this is a mythological scene. That's what they say. So that deposed ruler escaped.
What was his name?
His name was Alalu.
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 Deposed by Anu.
Deposed by Anu. And he escaped to Earth in a spacecraft. He crash landed, according to the tale. And when he was on Earth, he discovered that Earth has gold. We don't know yet, but according to the Sumerians, Earth is the only place in the solar system that has gold. And maybe our scientists will confirm it in time. So in order to ingratiate himself, in order maybe to be allowed to rejoin civilization, he informed the people on Marduk, on Nibiru, on the 12th planet, that there's gold on Earth, and gold could be used to assure their survival, because by suspending gold particles in the atmosphere, they could protect it from further dissipation. So it was that they decided for Enki to lead a mission to Earth. And the first idea, and it's also depicted in Sumerian depictions, which I reproduce in my books, the first idea was to extract the gold through some sophisticated process from the waters of the Persian Gulf. But this didn't work, or they didn't produce enough, whatever it was, so that on the next orbit of Nibiru, Marduk, when it was closest to Earth, both Anu, who was now the leader on Nibiru, and a son of his, who was given the epithet name Enlil, meaning Lord of the Command, came down to Earth. Enki was also one of his sons. His name, epithet, meant Lord Earth. As it happened, both of them were only half-brothers, and many of the conflicts and the wars on Earth, and we can get further down the road into that, were due to the fact that there was this rivalry, conflict between two half-brothers. But when they came down, a decision had to be made whether to abandon the whole project and risk ending their civilization, maybe ending all life on their planet, or trying to obtain the gold in some other way. They knew by then that gold could be mined in southern Africa, in what was in recent times Rhodesia. Mines were found there, by the way, that have been dated to 30, 40, even 80,000 years ago. But I'm talking about 400,000 years ago. And a decision was made to start mining the gold in southern Africa. For that purpose, more of them came to Earth. In the end, there were a total of 600 on Earth. They were called, those who were on Earth were called Anunnaki, literally meaning those who from heaven came to Earth, which is exactly the meaning of Nephilim, those who had come down to Earth. Some of them remained in Mesopotamia, where Eridu was established, and they set up a total of 7 settlements. They had, in addition to the first station, Eridu, they had a metallurgical center where they smelted and refined the ores brought over from southern Africa. They had 2 beacon cities for the landing of the shuttlecraft. They had a spaceport called Sipar, which literally meant bird city. They had a medical center called Shurupak under the lordship or control of a female who was the chief medical officer. I'd like to point out, by the way, since I talk Enki and I talk Enlil, that they were not all males. And as time went on and another generation followed, one of the most famous was a goddess, a female called Ishtar. This was a statue of her. When this was discovered at a place called Mari, this is the statue. This is Ishtar. In a place called Mari, the archaeologists who discovered it took a photograph standing around the statue, and at the first glance you don't realize it's a statue because it's lifelike, it's life-size, and it's as if a woman is standing among them, but this is the statue. Now if you look at the design of what she was wearing, and you can see her helmet, especially from the back, you can see that she had a neck pack, some instrument panel. You can see something that looks like earphones. The 2 horns served no doubt as antennas. You see a hose, maybe for oxygen or for whatever other purposes. So this is obviously a pilot's or an astronaut's garb. There was another picture of her.
This is the first woman astronaut we know of, is it?
No, the first one was the half-sister of Enki. Right. She was 3rd generation on Earth. Here's another depiction of her. And she looks like a World War I pilot, doesn't she?
Definitely. The goggles have it.
Right, everything. Except that here she didn't wear anything. She was the goddess of war and the goddess of love. The Greeks called her Aphrodite. Now, while we are on the subject of spacecraft and their landings, here is a depiction from an Egyptian tomb of a site in the Sinai Peninsula with what is, to me clearly, a rocket ship in its underground silo with the capsule for the astronauts above ground.
So it's subterranean.
In the Sinai Peninsula, right. So they came here about 450,000 years ago in search of gold. They brought 600 of them down. 300 of them, who were called Igigi, meaning those who observe and see, stayed in orbit, in Earth orbit, operated Earth stations, shuttlecraft, and were involved in taking up and transferring to motherships the gold, the refined gold, bringing down supplies, astronauts. People went back and forth. Now at some point, and the date is stated in the Sumerian writings, those who were working in the gold mines mutinied, and the tale of their mutiny in a text which scholars call the Epic of Atrahasis is told again in very great detail, almost as if somebody was describing the July 14th in France, the march on the Bastille, the day of the revolution, how they marched with torches, how they put their tools on fire, how they surrounded the home of the commander of Enlil and actually held him in house arrest until a council of all the leaders was held. And the other leaders, not Enlil, but the other leaders said, they're right. This work is really so back-breaking, so such hard toil that it can't go on. So again, the question was, as once before, to abandon the whole project, which was necessary, or to find another solution. And then Enki said, why don't we create a Lulu Amelu, a primitive worker, who will go down to the mines and do the hard work for us. So it has to be a being that has intelligence, that has hands, that can hold tools, that can understand instructions, that can do what it's told. And the other said, well, where do you find on earth such a being? So he said, that being already exists. These are actually his words, as written down 5,500 years ago by the Sumerians. That being already exists. All we have to do is implant on it the mark of the Anunnaki, of us. And there are texts, very detailed texts, of which the biblical tales are just mentions of, how they went about engaging in genetic manipulation, taking the egg of a female ape woman, implanting in it the genes of one of their own young males, in what we call today an in vitro process. And once the egg was fertilized with this combined genetic material, they implanted it in the wombs of one of their own females, not back in an ape woman. There was a lot of trial and error. The first beings that were born as a result of that were defective, without hands or without some other limbs or without eyesight. It was not instant success. But after trial and error, they arrived at what they called the perfect model. These are the Sumerian words, a perfect model. And then they started to use that genetic combination by implanting those fertilized eggs in what they the text term birth goddesses, 14 at a time, 7 male, 7 female, 7 male, 7 female, until they started to produce us, Homo sapiens, 300,000 years ago.
Please continue on this concept of the birth goddesses.
Well, this is how, according to the Sumerians, our ancestors, you and I, have come to be on this earth. And what I want to stress here, because some people don't grasp it or don't follow it willingly, perhaps, that is that there's absolutely no conflict between evolution and the Bible, or the Bible as I understand it based on the Sumerian sources, because according to the Sumerians there was evolution on earth. What they said is that when Marduk or Nibiru collided with Tiamat, breaking it up in two halves, and earth was one of those halves, the seed of life was passed by Nibiru Marduk to earth. In other words, according to the Sumerian beliefs, and this is also my philosophy, universal belief, is that life was brought into our solar system by the means of Nibiru Marduk from another solar system. The seed of life, therefore, was passed from it to Earth about 4 billion years ago. Then evolution began on both planets, on Marduk and on Earth. Since Marduk had it before, the process was a little more advanced. When they came here, when they came to Earth, through the same seed of life, they found also evolutionary development, but not as advanced as theirs. And therefore they did what I would call, they jumped the gun on evolution. I believe that we, Homo sapiens, would have evolved on Earth anyway, but in 5 million or 10 or 20 million, I don't know how long, they jumped the gun. The verses, I'm going back to the beginning of all my researches and my interest in the subject in chapter 6 of Genesis, that say that they married the daughters of men, and the English translation again would be that, and they saw that they were good, the daughters of men. This is not the Hebrew term. The Hebrew term means that, and they saw, or they found out that they were compatible, because unless they had the same genetic makeup, how could they have children? So they came here and they found evolution, ape man, ape woman, not to use, too scientific terminology. They jumped the gun, they created us, and we were compatible with them.
And the chief thing they were looking for was the thumb, the ability to work the minds.
At the beginning. Now what happened was that as more of us came into being, and the tale of the Garden of Eden is really the tale of how Homo sapiens was given the ability to procreate, because as I suppose some of our audience and readers know, hybrids like mules cannot procreate, and that was the problem with the early Homo sapiens. They just had to employ the so-called birth goddesses, implant the fertilized eggs, wait for them to give birth, and how long could you do that? So again, Enki plus his half-sister Ninhursag developed the second phase in our evolution to give us the ability to procreate by adding one chromosome to our genes. So as men developed and filled up the earth and undertook other tasks besides the mines, agriculture, growing food, growing sheep and other domesticated animals, a watershed event, not just physically, literally, but also conceptually happened, and that was the great flood or the deluge, which according also to the Bible, after that, the whole relationship between the Elohim, the plural, the term used in the Bible, and mankind changed, because once earth was completely devastated, the only way to continue surviving on earth, which they had to do for their needed gold, was to make man a partner, no longer a servant, but a partner to life, to civilization on earth. And it was after that that they divided the earth into 4 regions. They were still lords, they were still masters, but they created the institution of kingship, which we still have to this day, and they gave men 3 regions. They did keep 1 region for themselves, the so-called the sacred or unapproachable region, where they set up their space facilities, because Sipar, the pre-diluvial spaceport, was also wiped out by the deluge. They needed a new one, and that region, as I show in the new book, was in the Sinai Peninsula. Just like I asked the teacher years ago, who were the Nephilim, I asked myself, what's so special about the Sinai Peninsula? Because there's nothing there. Now, the Sinai Peninsula, because there was nothing there, because there were no rivers there that could sustain a civilization, agriculture, cities, was selected by them to be what they called the 4th, the sacred region. And all those lands surrounding it, including Jerusalem, including Lebanon, the so-called lands of the Bible, were really called in those ancient times the lands of Shem. All the lands in between Mesopotamia, which used to be the place of the spaceport of their first settlements, and the lands that were thus after the deluge, Lebanon, Canaan, the Sinai Peninsula, were the lands of Shem. And what did Shem mean? Shem meant rocket ship. They were the lands of the rocket ships. And the people descended of Shem inhabited the lands of the rocket ships. Now, I show the scheme of the spaceport, the landing corridor to it, and what its anchors were. And as you can see, the center was Jerusalem. Jerusalem was called also in the Bible the navel of the earth. Again, nobody stopped to ask why. It was called the navel of the earth because it was the center of this whole grid for landing on earth. The anchor was Mount Ararat, which in the biblical tale and in the Sumerian tale was called the Mount of Salvation, where Noah's Ark landed and where they came after the deluge when they landed from their orbiting spacecraft. The landing corridor passed through a place called today Baalbek. It's now, unfortunately, the center of much of the terror organizations in the Middle East, but still existing there and going back, according to local legends, to the times before the deluge. There is a vast platform paved with huge stones, about 500,000 square feet, and in its base, supporting a certain section of it, there are stone blocks that are, many of them weigh 600 tons. For example, the largest stones in the pyramids weigh 200 tons, so you get a comparison So there is a vast platform on which ancient peoples built temples in honor of its sacredness. What we see today are ruins of Roman temples. Some of them are the largest temples ever built by the Romans. The largest temples built by the Romans are not in Rome, but are at that place, Baalbek. And in ancient times, that was the place to which Gilgamesh went on one of his journeys, trying to be taken aloft. Now, supporting a section where very heavy loads must have been placed, like the stationing or the coming down of a rocket ship, were those blocks weighing 600 tons, and some of them 1,100 tons, 1,100 tons. Now, even today, we do not have a piece of equipment that can lift 1,100 tons. We know where those blocks were quarried because one of them was found still lying in situ, half quarried and partly unquarried, in a place in a valley not far from Baalbek. And in antiquity, and according to the legends before the deluge, someone quarried those blocks, lifted them, took them up a mountain a few miles away, 4,000 feet up, and actually placed them precisely to fit one another without mortar, without cement, but you cannot even insert a razor blade. I think I have here one of the sketches. This is the one lying in situ. You can see that little fly on top of it, that's a man sitting on that block, which gives you an idea of the size of it. Now this is one of them, actually there are three of them, in place at the base of the platform, which stretches way behind there. Again, you can see a man here, and this is the relationship. So someone in antiquity could have done and actually achieved that.
How do you think they did it?
Well, I just assumed that they had the technology. If they could fly in space and do other things, they probably had the technology. Some, since having read this in my book, say, well, maybe they had anti-gravity capabilities, perhaps, I don't know. But anyway, that place is here in Baalbek, which is part of this landing grid. This is Jerusalem, this is Mount Ararat. Now, this landing corridor had to have two beacons at each end. Here they built artificial beacons, two artificial mountains. That's what they were called, the artificial mountains, which we call the Great Pyramids of Giza. They were not built by any pharaoh. They were built by them right after the deluge. And here they selected two mountains, which are sacred to this day. This the two mountains near the monastery of Santa Caterina. One of them is called Mount Moses. The other is called by an adjoining name, not too familiar to people. But there are actually two mountains here and two mountains here. And this was the reason for the Sinai Peninsula being sacred to this very day.
It's most interesting. I remember standing at Baalbek in 1972 and spending a considerable time there, and of course never dreaming of the implications that you're telling us.
Were you at the southwestern corner where this huge platform, the massive platform is, where the 6 pillars are still standing?
We went where all the ruins were of Rome and wherever the guides took us.
Well,
We spent a good day there, so perhaps we were right there.
well, you stood where the Nephilim had stood.
We were very conscious of the vibrations of the place.
There are many subterranean structures, tunnels, which have not yet been entered. There were several attempts made to penetrate the platform, the stone platform, and see what's under it, but they all failed. Nobody could break through.
So in fact, we don't know what's in
We
there.
don't know. Well, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, telling his adventures going to that place, there is a mention that he found the entrance to the tunnel of the Anunnaki under the platform, but at the last minute he was prevented from entering by Ishtar, the goddess we've just seen. She didn't let him go in.
She prevailed at the door.
Well, it's really, there was more to it. She wanted, the price of permission was for him to make love to her. And he knew that no mortal making love to her would remain alive. So he withstood the temptation. So there's a lot of hanky-panky going on too.
Gilgamesh, of course, did ultimately go on to find the secret of their eternal
Well,
youth.
he went, his next journey was to the Sinai Peninsula. It was the second destination. The Epic of Gilgamesh actually calls that the place of the missiles. The Baalbek site is called in the Epic of Gilgamesh the landing place. The other one is called the site of the, or the land of the missiles. He made a lot of headway there, and he met there, according to the Sumerian tale, he met there none other than Noah, who was still alive, though thousands of years had passed since the deluge, because the brother Enlil had promised Noah that he would be saved from man's fate to die, because he was the hero of the deluge and helped preserve the seed of mankind. And Gilgamesh went there, deeming Noah, or in his Sumerian name, Utnapishtim, deeming him to be one of his ancestors. Gilgamesh also believed, like pharaohs or like Alexander much later after him, believed that he is entitled to escape mortality because his mother was a goddess. And indeed, this is an interesting detail, that because in his case the mother was a goddess, not a father as Alexander had believed or claimed, he was considered 2/3 divine, not just half. And he therefore argued with some of the Anunnaki leaders. He said, if I'm 2/3 divine of your genetic material, why should I die like a mortal? And when he went in his search for immortality, reaching the place in the Sinai Peninsula, discovering Utnapishtim, or the biblical Noah there, and saying to him, since you have lived so long, thousands of years, tell me the secret. How come you are still alive? How come that you, a man from thousands of years ago, look like me? That was, by the way, one of his questions. And it is there in that Epic of Gilgamesh that the story of the deluge is told. This is where scholars have found the so-called Babylonian, Mesopotamian, Sumerian tale of the deluge. This hero of the deluge tells him, since you have found me, let me tell you what happened, and tells him the story of the deluge, of the ark, how he was saved, how he saved the seed of mankind, and therefore he was granted longevity. But he said, since there's no other deluge, how can you attain immortality? So Gilgamesh started to cry and beg for some way. So he said there is a well in the Sinai Peninsula. This was really one of the places that Alexander was looking for, the source of the waters of life. He says there is a well within which there grows a plant. If you would dive down and find the plant and take it with you and eat of it, each time that you get older, if you would eat of it, you would be forever young. That is how you will escape mortality. This is, by the way, the story of Ponce de Leon, you know, looking for the fountain of youth. So Gilgamesh dived, according to his epic tale, found the plant, and was wandering back to his city, to Erech, in Mesopotamia, in Sumer. But when he stopped to bathe in a brook, a serpent came and stole the plant.
What was the fate of Noah, since he was supposed to be immortal?
No, he was not immortal. He was given longevity.
Just
Eventually he died, because they too, the Nephilim, there are tales of how they died. There are tales of how they were revived, brought back to life from death. And there are tales, which I haven't told yet, but I'm keeping them for the next book, of how they died. Because if we believe that any of them were born, then we must believe that some of them have died. I don't think there can be birth without death. So we are talking here about incredible longevity.
Because of their
orbit, because to them,
3,600.
that's right.
3,600 years to our 1 year.
To our 1 year.
Does that really mean they do not age more than we do in 1 year, in 3,600 years?
Yes, well, if you look here at Enki, in my estimate, he was about, I would say, 140 years old in their terms.
140 times 3,600?
3,600, right.
Is he alive today?
I don't know. I don't think he's on our planet anymore, but whether he's back alive on their planet, I don't know.
Well, considering that these Nephilim are in a certain aspect messengers, they bring science, they bring technology. What about the Malachim and other types of messengers?
Well, as you imply in what you just said, Malachim, which is translated angels, really means emissaries, messengers. And even they, the Nephilim, who some ancient peoples, especially the Greeks, considered as divine beings, I think whatever they did on earth, coming here for gold, supposedly they thought they're coming for gold, but maybe they were really sent to bring us about. And in that respect, they were just carrying out somebody else's divine plan. They too were just malachim or emissaries.
There is evidence that the National Security Council has extensive documentation of such extraterrestrials landing. What do you think of their evidence, and what do they say about it?
Well, I have not seen the evidence that they are keeping secret. I know of that one instance which I mentioned of the findings by IRAS, the infrared telescopic stations, which have been also suppressed. And again, this brings me to the question for which I don't have an answer, and maybe it has either political or international or military or maybe even religious reasons behind it, and that is, what is the fear of saying or admitting or having an open mind about the possibility that we are not alone in our solar system. As I said, I don't understand it, but others must have reasons, and I don't have the answer to that.
Most people don't understand this.
Well, so I'm in good company.
Most of us have watched the Air Force cover-up of space landings. Hangar 18 was a movie showing that cover-up.
Mm-hmm.
And we know they cover it up, but why is it true? What will we find out?
Well,
what else will we find out?
Do you have a theory why they are doing that?
Well, I can only ask the question, if we find this out, what more will we find out that they don't want us to know about our own development or cooperation with extraterrestrials, or what is going on in the polar caps, what is going on under the earth or in the sea? We understand the technology of spacecraft can go at great depths under the sea. You pointed out that Noah's Ark was the design of a modern equipped submarine that could endure this flood.
Yes.
So the technology is great, and the concealment, I don't know. Are the Nephilim here today? Are they in our governments? Is it they who don't want us to know too much? You talk of population control, allowing the starvation of the people at the time of the flood, which we think coincides with the date of the sinking of Atlantis. Are there Nephilim among us today, and are there powers that be that feel that they are in control of the rest of us and therefore are keeping secrets for their own reasons?
That is one interesting theory, but I don't know.
We talk about longevity of Nephilim, but we could also talk about their presence, the reincarnation of the Anunnaki, and therefore the presence in our midst of various evolutions. We see that there is a wide variety of evolution, development of intelligence, different types of bodies, cultures, traditions, religions.
No doubt.
So Earth seems to be at a crossroads of various sorts of evolutions that could have come in the same way those came from the one planet, the 12th planet.
I would definitely agree with you that even if we are not aware or cognizant of their presence, even, and I say it with an if, even if they have left at some point, they have not abandoned neither Earth nor us. They definitely, if they left, they intend to come back. They definitely let at least some people on Earth to be the guardians or the continuers of their civilization, their teachings, their technology. They may well be behind our own advances into space.
Apparently there are some people in the world today who do feel that they are the ones almost divinely ordained to make decisions for everyone else. We find very powerful people in various types of occupations, and they seem to be in control no matter what the people do. And those whom we are taught to believe are our enemies, we find that the leaders of both sides cooperate in various areas, so that although we're taught there are enemies, there is a vast cooperation. So it seems that either appointed or anointed ones or some actual race slightly different than the rest of humanity is in fact in control of war. War seems to be the dominating factor in the world today, and rivalries. And when you see who is whose rival, they seem to have very similar characteristics, which bring us to your third book about the wars of gods and men, and who did bring war here and why.
Well, the reasons for their own wars were very, very human, if one could put it that way. They started to quarrel about the rule and succession on their own planet. Those rivalries were transferred to Earth because of the two half-brothers and their sons. According to their rules of succession, if, say, Anu the new ruler on their planet, had a son who was the firstborn, Enki. He was the crown prince, so to say. He was the heir, because he was the firstborn son. But if at any time afterwards a son was born to Anu by a half-sister of Anu, from the same father but not from the same mother, then that new son was the legal heir, not the firstborn, but the legal heir, and he superseded in the order of succession the firstborn. And in that case, it was Enlil. Enlil was born to Anu by a half-sister of Anu. And there are many texts where Enki cries out and says, I am the firstborn. Why am not I the one to succeed on the throne, if we want to use that word, of Nibiru? But he was not entitled to it. And just as there were conflicts between the sons of Abraham and between the sons of his sons, who was the firstborn, who was born by the favorite wife, who was born by a handmaiden, you know, Esau and Isaac, you find that this was the problem among them. For example, I mentioned the chief medical officer, Nin Kharsag, who was a half-sister of both of them, of Enki and Enlil. Now, Enlil managed, though he was later married to a nurse who became his wife, a young nurse who became his wife, he had, though he never married his half-sister, he had a son by her called Ninurta. Enki made tremendous efforts. He seduced his sister to have also a son by her, but he never succeeded in having a male son by his half-sister, Enlil did. Now he had a firstborn son whom the Babylonians called Marduk and venerated eventually as their supreme god, supreme lord. And then there was this conflict about the son of the firstborn and the legal heir of the legal heir, who of them is entitled to be Lord of Earth. And there were wars and conflicts resulting from that. So their wars and their conflicts, maybe I should say, I'm sorry to say, or maybe it's disappointing to hear, but this is the truth, this is what comes out from those tales, were for very human-like reasons. One war that I termed the Pyramid Wars was really against the background of what is no less than a Romeo and Juliet love affair between Ishtar, who belonged to the house of Enlil, and the youngest son of Enki. And the oldest son, Marduk, opposed the marriage. And there was conflict and warfare on that basis as well.
And
it was in an instance that many things, if not all the things I say write about, could be described as incredible. But the most incredible thing, perhaps, is that there is an Egyptian text naming the date, the year in their calendar on Earth, when it was the first time in a struggle between the so-called two so-called Egyptian gods, Horus and Set, descendants all of Enki, where humans were enlisted or conscripted for the first time to join their battles. That was the first time, and it's recorded, incredibly, with the date, when for the first time we were taught to use weapons and to go fight each other in their causes, not in our causes. And that is how men learn to make war.
That's what we feel is happening to us today.
Well, but who is driving us today? I don't know. Either those
Oh, they're ideological drives.
mysterious beings, or our own greed, our own...
Well, we're lined up on battlefields for defending causes of capitalist corporations or Soviet governments, or not for real reasons of freedom. We're lined up to defend interesting madmen who've decided they want more territory, and we don't want more territory.
Well, if you read the third book, which deals with events 9,000 years ago, 8,000, 4,000, and 2,000 years ago, when nuclear weapons, I show, were used for the first time on Earth, you find the same no reasons for having wars.
Well, you show very effectively the rivalries that brought about that nuclear war that was the destruction of Sodom, and not only Sodom and Gomorrah, but through the cloud and the winds became the total destruction of the area of Mesopotamia. And would you like to tell us about that and Abraham's role in that event?
Yes, I was afraid you would never ask me. Now, one thing that was done, especially at the turn of the century and in the several decades afterwards, was that it wasn't fashion to analyze the Bible critically. And those critics of the Bible, most of them German scholars at the time, asked such question as, what is the independent evidence that there ever existed an Abraham or even a Moses? Some, I remember studying, were so clever that they said that there was really never a person Moses, but the stories refer to another one who adopted the name Moses. So, and that question, especially to me, since I'm a descendant of Abraham, was particularly interesting and important, and that is, not only was there an Abraham, or am I the product of a myth, but if he was, as I believe that he was, who really was he? Why was he instructed to go from his birthplace, his land, which was Sumer, to another place, stay there, continue, go to Canaan, move fast, as the Bible says, to the Negev, go to Egypt, and he was, if he was just a nobody, a nomad, or some claim he was a marauding chieftain, you know, a sheik, living from being a highway robber. If he was all that, how come that the minute he came to Egypt, he was received by the Pharaoh? And we know he was received by the Pharaoh because he instructed his wife what to say and what not to say. When he came back from Egypt, another king, a Philistine king, met him and made a treaty with him. Again, if he was just somebody unimportant, why? So, as I found in the Mesopotamian Sumerian writings, the earlier, the more original texts dealing with various biblical tales, for example, the biblical tale of the Tower of Babel is told in Sumerian writings in greater detail. The tale of the deluge is told over 12 tablets. I ask myself also, if Abraham, according to the Bible, came from Sumer, came from a city called Ur, or Er as many here pronounce it, but the true pronunciation is Ur. If he came from there, if he participated in what the Bible describes as an international war, the war of the kings of the East having raised an army and marched towards Canaan to fight certain Canaanite kings, and Abraham was involved in that. He turned them back, and then when they seized his nephew Lot, he pursued them up to Damascus and defeated them in Damascus. If he was a participant in all these events, if he witnessed, as we are told in the Bible, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, is it really possible that all these sources that served as original, much more detailed texts for the other biblical tales, could it be that they really don't mention Abraham, don't mention the war of the kings, don't mention the upheavaling of the cities of the plain of the Jordan? Because if they don't, I really have a problem, you know, then who am I? And I did find texts that were uncovered, that were written on tablets such as these in various museums, that not only mentioned the name of Abraham, and I have here 2 tablets, and these are not replicas, these are the actual tablets. They are very small, because actually all they were customs receipts. There was a customs station in ancient Sumer, and all the trade the international trade had to pass through there, and the people had to pay duty, and these were their receipts. Now, luckily for our knowledge of history, what happened there, each receipt ended with an inscription of the date, the day of the month, and the year. The year was not like 1985 or whatever. The year was named after the major event of that year. So if in that year a major temple was built, it says year in which such and such temple was built. If it was a year in which a major war had taken place, it said year in which that place was attacked. It always said that place was destroyed, because no king admitted that he may have lost the war. He always succeeded. So one of these tablets has this inscription on it. This is the obverse, this is the reverse. The reverse has the year date, and what these Sumerian cuneiform characters say is Mu Ne Ibruum Ki Bachul. And in English it means year in which shepherding place of Ibruum destroyed. Now the name of Abraham, before it was changed to a Semitic sounding name, was Abram, and this is the Sumerian Ibruum. And this is a tablet from the 7th year of the reign of a Sumerian king called Amar-Sin, who in his record said that in that 7th year he raised an army to go to the Sinai Peninsula to attack Canaanite cities and to reach the spaceport that was in the Sinai Peninsula at the time. And he encountered someone blocking his way to the spaceport, not fighting him yet, but just blocking his way. And that was the shepherd Abraham. And I have in my book a map which I drew that was not found in archaeological sites, which shows the route of the invaders, which shows where Abraham, from his headquarters at the place called Kadesh Barnea, blocked their way to the spaceport. It shows how they turned back and only then actually fought the Canaanite kings, capturing Abraham's nephew Lot. and how Abraham then pursued. And I've submitted an article to one of the scientific magazines showing that Abraham actually possessed an elite corps of cavalry, which he used to pursue and capture this huge army and overwhelm them and retrieve or release his nephew. So I found in the Sumerian and other Mesopotamian sources details of that war, the description of the march and the destination, the year, the precise year, which was 2041 BC, the 7th year of Amar Sin, and the admission in that inscription, and there are a few tablets like that, it's not the only one, that the encounter, the military encounter, was with Abram. Now, Abraham therefore participated or was successful in his assignment to ward off any attack on the spaceport, including the site of Jerusalem, which played a major role.
Are you saying he was the appointed guardian of the space station?
Defender.
The defender.
Defender would be a more appropriate word, right.
And who appointed him?
The one whom he called his Lord.
And who was that?
I'm not prepared to say.
It had to have been Nephilim because it's their spaceport. Who else would want it guarded?
Well, let's leave it the way you put it.
He came from Ur, and he came as a man of high station. His wife
Right, as far
also.
as I could determine, again showing these various sources, he came of a family that was a royal priestly family. What assignment that family had in Ur, I explain in my book. That's how Abraham grew up in Ur. He was not born in Ur, he was born in Nippur. And I explained the rest of his mission and why he was selected. And also, once the Sumerian civilization was destroyed by the nuclear cloud, why it was he and his descendants who were chosen. And that is the meaning of the chosen people. Was chosen to uphold, continue, maintain, and keep on Earth the space civilization, the seed that will continue the preordained plan that is carried from one solar system to another.
Are you saying that you revealed this in your book, Wars of Gods and Men?
I don't know if I reveal it, but I say it. And so to the extent that I may be the first one saying it, maybe it is a disclosure.
But you're not actually stating which of the gods he is serving.
No, I'm not saying that because I don't want to say that.
But basically the concept is that he is one of the guardians of the guardian's shrine.
That's right.
And his seed.
That's correct.
And their descendants in the Sinai and
That's
in this
what I
Middle
believe
East.
in. But to the extent that you put it so personally to me, I think that certainly some of the descendants of Abraham, perhaps I am among them, have a role to play in moving this river within which, as I said, the fish individually can twist and turn and live and die and swallow each other or whatever. But the whole stream goes on, and I think that the descendants of Abraham are prime movers.
Now, if you take those descendants and see them not only as a bloodline, but as reincarnated, all of those who were of Abraham reincarnating, then you have a broadening concept of who this seed of Abraham might be, because they could have reincarnated not necessarily again through the bloodline, but through the various nations in the earth, since the prophecy is they're being scattered.
Well, the Hebrews have definitely intermarried over the 4,000 years since Abraham. So I don't think that the genetic code or the genetic memory or whatever it is that makes us, or some of us, just do those things, maybe sometimes even without wanting to do them. This is definitely spread among all the nations. I don't think that it's now limited just to somebody who goes to a Jewish synagogue, but it's probably part of the whole human story now.
I wonder if you consider that the warfare and the rivalries that are so carefully set forth in the Greek mythologies, and then on through this record of the use of nuclear energy by the Nephilim in their wars at Sodom, if you think that that is at the basis and root of the threatening and hovering of nuclear war today, is there a rivalry going on today?
Well, I don't know if I can speak with the same authority about current events as I claim to have regarding ancient events. Certainly I'm not uninformed and not without opinions, but maybe you should get somebody like Reagan and Gorbachev here and question them on that. But
are you prepared to say that any of the Nephilim remained, or any of the Anunnaki, or only those they appointed, such as kings and guardians? And if they're not here, when are they coming back? Are they coming back with the return of the 12th planet?
Well, if I'll answer everything, you will not invite me again.
That's what they said to us in Jerusalem.
Let's leave it for the next interview.
That's what the guide said. When you have your next book with you, your fourth book.
I would say in about 2 years.
So that's when you want to come back.
I can tell you its title, though.
All right.
The End of Days.
The End of Days?
The End of Days.
What days are you referring to?
All days.
All days.
Human days and Nephilim days.
There's a lot of endings prophesied in the Bible. We think in terms of the ending of 2000.
They will definitely be part of what I base my conclusions on.
Perhaps the beginnings and endings of civilizations are clocked by the cyclic return of the 12th planet.
Probably, probably.
Since it has such an impact and is so disruptive.
I would agree with you in that conclusion.
We look to, in the concept of reincarnation, a progressive evolution of the soul, a purpose, a union with the Supreme God over all the gods and Nephilim and the ones who develop their technological wizardry and spacecraft. And we think in terms of, I think, the Hindu concept, which is also Christian, in terms of ultimately the acceleration or the ascension into a plane of spirit that is beyond this created universe. And in that sense of it, we think of the end of all days as also the end of, let's say, of our karma, the balancing of our karma, and our evolution in these planes, and that there is an ultimate return, and that those who came forth from the Supreme Being have a divine spark, and through that divine spark they return.
That's, I think we are saying the same thing in different words.
So we like to think that the end of all days is not the annihilation, but a point of transcendence.
It's just another beginning.
Hopefully in a new and higher level.
The end is the beginning, and the future is the past.
Zecharia Sitchin, thank you for being the flame of freedom that speaks at Summit University Forum.
Thank you for having me.
You've been watching Summit University Forum with Elizabeth Clare Prophet. Summit University Forum, where the flame of freedom speaks. The views expressed by those interviewed at Summit University Forum are not necessarily those of Elizabeth Clare Prophet or the faculty of Summit University.